Good afternoon, and welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane's Book Chat Thursday. I am W.D. Foster Graham. I am the book review editor for Inside News, and I will be your host today on this during Black History Month. We provide stimulating, robust, inspiring, and informative conversation from all aspects of the Black and African diaspora. We are fast approaching 2,000 subscribers. So if you like our content or love to see more of it, like, share, and subscribe. Um, Today's topic is the anthology Black Media in Minnesota in its tradition, practice, and vision. Now, before I introduce the amazing sisters that become part of this anthology and this vital topic in our community, I'd like to make a couple of announcements regarding Black History Month literary events here in Minnesota. Uh, the Minnesota Black Authors Expo event that was scheduled for Saturday, February 8th at the Apple Valley Library in Dakota County has been canceled due to winter storm advisory conditions. But stay tuned for future events from the Minnesota Black Authors Expo. And on February 22nd, St. Peter's AME Church will be hosting its second annual We Are Wordsmiths community event. That'll take place from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and it is free and open to the public. So come on out, meet and greet with our authors, and support our authors, buy their books, and have a literary feast at St. Peter's A&E Church, 401 East 41st Street, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 55409. That being said, it is my great pleasure to introduce our guests for today's panel. Dr. Catherine Squires is the Professor Emerita at the University of Minnesota. And after over 20 years in academia, she retired from her position as Associate Dean of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Minnesota. These days, she writes, she edits, teaches yoga, and facilitates discussions and curates workshops. And over the past 2 decades, she's engaged in multiple community partnerships to uplift and share local Black histories, support BIPOC writers, share accessible yoga practices, curates panels, hosts conferences, and facilitates intergenerational story sharing. Yes. She has published multiple books and articles on media, race, gender, and politics, including Dispatches from the Color Line in 2007 and The Post-Racial Mystique, 2014, and edited collection Dangerous Discourses, Feminism, Gun Violence, and Civic Life in 2016. She earned her PhD in Communication Studies from Northwestern University, and she was a doctoral fellow in the Center for Black Studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara from 1998 to 1999. And in 1999, she began her first faculty position at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and in 2007, she moved to the University of Minnesota. Our next panelist, Dr. Danielle Brown, is an associate professor and the 1855 University Professor of Community and Urban Journalism at Michigan State University. She's an award-winning journalist and researcher, and her research, her critiques, and pioneering public service work focus on politics, identity, and social change, especially in Black Midwestern communities. Dr. Brown has received multiple awards and recognitions for her research and service record from organizations such as the American Political Science Association, and the International Communication Association. She currently holds the 1855 University Community and Urban Journalism Professorship at Michigan State University. She previously served on the faculty at the University of Minnesota as the Cowles Professor of Journalism, Diversity, and Equality from 2020 to 2023. And prior to joining the Academy, she worked in journalism and nonprofit public relations. And last, but hey, definitely not least, is Lissa Jones-Lofgren. She is the executive director of the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. And she is a distinguished executive leader, fractional CEO, and organizational behaviorist specializing in guiding organizations through complex transformations and fostering cultures of equity and inclusion. And she is the host of the acclaimed podcast, Black Market Reads, amplifying the voices of Black authors for the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. Known for her expertise in governance, strategic planning, and stakeholder engagement, Lissa is a sought-after speaker, facilitator, and coach who empowers organizations to align their missions with impactful, sustainable skills. It's my pleasure to introduce my panel. So say welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Now, since we'll be discussing Black media in Minnesota, and in my opinion, it's more vital today than it has ever been. And so I would like to start with this question. Why are Black independent media outlets so important, especially today? So we'll start with Dr. Brown.
Yeah, thanks. And what a great question to start off with. I mean, I think everything that we build is always, especially as a Black community, is imaginative and vital for our existence. And so the media is simply one of those places that we were able to innovate and create a space for our own safety and our own creative, imaginative world that often isn't included in mainstream spaces. And so when it comes to today, particularly, I think we're in a really interesting sort of political crossroads where we're watching a regression, unlike those that we've seen in the history books before, but a regression in our political and social standings that is kind of terrifying and a little bit unprecedented. But what we do have a precedent with in Black communities is resilience and finding these spaces and outlets where we can continue to create our communities, to sustain our communities, and to not let them be broken by the challenges that come and try to tear us apart in lots of different ways, as we, again, have seen historically. And so I think Black media will stand as one of those spaces and continues to stand as one of those spaces as an outlet where we have a safe space for free expression, a safe space for innovation, and for speaking to each other in ways that resonate appropriately. The Black media has always served as a place for us to be able to do that. And I think that while it may not resonate, especially with younger people, exactly like it did in the early 1900s, it certainly is a space that continues to have the same kind of foundations and opportunities for Black people to get together in community and to share knowledge, information, and experiences.
So true, so true. Dr. Squires?
Well, I echo all of that, of course, what Dr. Brown said. And also, I think today, Black media might be even more important because of the ways that disinformation can spread so quickly. So having a set of media resources and individual journalists and publications that folks know and trust and can pass along and recommend to each other in ways that make sense to everyone and give us a sense of not only that we're going to get the information we need, but we are getting it from sources that we know are not being co-opted and, quite frankly, being put out there to bamboozle folks. So I think that the Black media have been doing this kind of work since the very beginning. And I think, you know, a lot of the folks, I'm going to just do a shameless plug. Here's the book. A lot of the folks who contributed to the collection show how over history it's been so important for us to have independent spaces that we control, that we can guarantee access to other Black people, so that when other folks, people like Elon Musk, people like the current president, decide that they want to mold what used to be a communication space for everyone. Let's think about Twitter, which is now known as X. They want to mold it into a vehicle just for white folks to dominate. And they get to decide what the algorithm looks like. They get to decide whether or not they're going to say that you are even allowed to be on the platform. They can shut you down anytime they want to. It's very important for Black folks to always have our hands on whatever emerging media technology there is, so that we have a space that we can guarantee we can curate and keep out the nonsense.
That is so true, because in these days when we're talking about the attempts to erase our history and or to say that misinformation, that sort of thing, yeah, this is something that's vital. Could you share with us again how the anthology came into being?
Well, I know that Mr. Al McFarlane, whose show we are on today, was working with the folks at In Black Ink to think about how we could put together a collection that shows how much strength there is in Black media in Minnesota and, as Dr. Brown was saying, the broader Midwest. So when we think about the Midwest, a lot of folks on the coast say it's flyover territory. And as we saw in the last election, mainstream media like to pretend that states like Minnesota and Michigan and Ohio are pretty much just full of white people, except for maybe a couple places in a few cities. And so I think this collection is really important in the ways that it brings forward the stories, not just of Black media generally, but of Minnesota specifically, and how strong we've been, even though we might be a small portion of the population. We have always been using media, and particularly news media, but also the arts and all kinds of ways of writing, filming, and expressing ourselves, so that we don't get boxed out of having ways to communicate with each other about our own lives and set the story straight.
And speaking of saying that story, I'd like to our viewers to have you share what the history is of the Black press, because in this digital age, a lot of our younger viewers kind of forget where we started from and how it came about, and the need for Black press.
Sure. I mean, I will defer to Dr. Squires as Black press historian to provide all of the various examples that I will probably not be able to provide on the fly. But I will just say, so I can pipe in here, that the Black press has been around for a very long time, and it's in all of the different eras of how Black people were able to show up in American history. The Black press has been by its side as a place of where we know some of the best and brightest of our stories. And so while I'm sure Dr. Squires will talk about many of the, of the foundational spaces where the Black press began, including those spaces here in the Midwest, and how it's evolved over time. Like, what I find that resonates throughout each of them is that the Black press offers these little jewelry boxes of stories about Black people in every single one of these eras, that provides us with an insight about not just the tragedy, but the joy and the resilience and the amazingness of that we are in times of strife and sadness. And so I'll shut up there and let the true goat of the Black press.
Well, I appreciate that title. I don't know if I can take it. I stand on the shoulders of others who worked very hard to preserve Black newspapers at times when libraries did not collect them. So you go nowadays and you search up a newspaper from 1860 or 1828, and you can find digitized versions of the New York Times and other papers of record. For a long time, they didn't even use microfilm to preserve Black newspapers, except for in a few cases in cities like Chicago and New York. So I can say that despite that attempt at erasure and refusal to help archive the Black press, as well as Black movies, we might have lost the films of Oscar Micheaux, for that matter, if we hadn't had Black collectors keeping his films safe. The first known published Black newspaper was Freedom's Journal in 1827, so almost 40 years before the Civil War. And it was put together by two free Black gentlemen, and their launching editorial said, "Too long have others spoken for us." So again, decades before the Civil War, decades before the end of slavery, free Black folks were saying it is not enough for abolitionist white allies to speak for us because they have the money and the leisure time to write pamphlets or publish newspapers. They said we really have to speak for ourselves because we are the only ones who experience this country the way we do. We are the ones who are not granted full citizenship. We are the ones, after the Fugitive Slave Act, who could be captured back into slavery and have nothing to say about it. If someone harms us, we are not even allowed to testify on our own behalf in court. So if you think about just the quality of communication in public that was available to Black Americans, enslaved or free, before the Civil War and after, for that matter, it's really remarkable to see how many folks decided they needed to create their own engines of communication in order to move the political situation further, and also just to get a livelihood, right? So if you were a free Black blacksmith, or you were really good at taking care of horses and you wanted to advertise your services in the newspaper, well, a white newspaper owner could say, "I'm not going to take your ad." If you were trying to start a petition drive and you wanted to publicize it in a white newspaper, the white editor and publisher could say, "I don't want to put it in there. There's nothing keeping me from stopping you doing it wherever you want, but I'm the only game in town." So if we think about how much controlling the means of production matters to what stories get told, it's just clear that Black people in the United States and all over the world in the diaspora have decided to create their own communications vehicles as soon as possible so that they could connect with each other more seamlessly and also gather more allies who were actually listening to the ways we were talking about the issues, not just the ways other folks were translating those issues.
That's true. It's something I've always think about when it comes to sharing our stories. If we don't do it, someone else will, and it won't be accurate. And that has shown up in mainstream media. Say, Dr. Brown, because I know you were as part of the Sankofa event. That's where we first met. And can you share some of what was shared during that event?
Sure. We talked about, we responded to Al McFarlane's eloquent speech about the importance of the Black press. And it was me and Danielle Pierce Bergen, who also has an amazing chapter in the book. So I hope people will check that out. But we, a little bit, Danielle is a a producer in the mainstream, and we had, a pretty robust back and forth about how we talk about the mainstream. Oftentimes we think about the Black press as this entity and substitute to the mainstream because the mainstream isn't for us. And that can hit hard when you are a journalist who previously worked in the mainstream and you're Black, or if you're Daniel, for example, who has a high ranking production job at TPT here in the cities. Like, what does that mean, and how does it make him feel to be in that position, to be in the mainstream and feel like you may be being co-opted or a part of something that your own community doesn't like? And so we went through both. That is a piece of tying into having a mainstream job, but also there's another perspective that we hope that Black community members can understand and incorporate into their understanding of the mainstream, and that really is that the Black journalists in the mainstream are not simply sellouts that cater to institutional norms and expectations that we might have for the mainstream. There is a lot of grinding that is happening inside that industry too. I know certainly that Daniel is one of those producers that is bringing work to the mainstream that we wouldn't see otherwise without him. And a lot of my research that I've done both in Minnesota and across other communities in the Midwest has really focused on the role of Black journalists within the mainstream and how they act as voices of dissent and advocacy for our communities, even if it's a little bit more difficult for us to see. And certainly I would agree it is harder to see how Black communities could be wholly represented in the mainstream. But a lot of the conversation was just sort of about the experiences of Black journalists and how they in the mainstream and how they sort of navigate some of those tricky situations that we have experienced or that are experiencing, and how we might think through our critiques of the mainstream a little bit differently, especially when we think about the individual efforts that are there, that are working to really represent us more fully.
Hey, I appreciate that. And then those are some things that kind of stuck with me when I attended the event. And I see that Lissa is backstage. Let's bring her into the conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so sorry I'm late.
Well, hey, as long as you're here, that's what counts. And we're happy to have you in this conversation about Black media in Minnesota and stuff. I know Dr. Squires and Dr. Browns have been sharing what the importance of it is. And hey, and I am with you every step of the way. One thing I want to ask you, Lissa, is what was your reaction when this project was presented to you to be part of it?
You wanted me to write?
Yeah.
That was my reaction. That was kind of want me to write? That's really was my reaction. You want me to write? What would I write about? And so that was my first reaction. And it came from a transition from public school to private school in 9th grade. I transitioned into the Blake schools, and Rick Drillmellum was my social psych teacher. And he told me that I could not write an A paper. And I realized that for, 40 years, I probably said more than wrote, and that it all came back to him. So when Raquette and Anura asked me to be a part of this project, it was like a freeing that I didn't know I needed.
Hey, and just taking this to another step on that, since as the director of the Givens Foundation, tell our viewers about the Givens Foundation role in the Black press and Black media.
Absolutely. The Givens Foundation has existed for 53 years. It's one of the oldest Black foundations probably in the country, but certainly in this state, and committed to the idea of literature as liberation. We're still committed to literature as liberation. And as part of that, the Givens Foundation sponsors Black Market Reads. It's a podcast that amplifies the voices of Black authors. We're in season 10 this year, and we are in collaboration on a second group of podcasts called Black Market Reads on Health with Bukata Hayes and the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota company. So we're really excited to amplify the voices of Black authors. We have national and international authors who are coming in, but centered on African-American traditions, African-American life. And Givens is committed to doing that for as long as we can. I'm excited to have been their host for 9 seasons, and we are at it again this season. So we're really looking forward to it. Thank you for asking. You can find it at blackmarketreads.com.
Amen, amen, amen.
Thank you.
Now, Minnesota has produced some amazing, and should I say, celebrities in the area of journalism. We know about Carl Rowan, Cecil Newman, Roy Wilkins, Gordon Parks, and their contributions to Black media. Now, taking that from then to forward, in terms of recent events, how did local journalism respond after the murder of George Floyd and COVID?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want Dr. Brown to go ahead because I know that a huge part of her recent work has been drilling down into the details of just that and how important it was to have Black journalists here in Minnesota be part of that.
Okay.
It was critical. And don't let me get too nerdy with the details. But, right, I moved to Minnesota in 2020, so a week after George Floyd was murdered. And it was, what a time to relocate and work there. And most of my work is auditing sort of the content that journalism produces. And so during that time, I focused exclusively on Minneapolis-St. Paul's media networks, including the Black press and the mainstream. And I think, post 2020, those first couple of weeks, or post George Floyd's murder and the first few months of COVID, what we think about the mainstream as being like not reflective of Black communities and not reflective of our voices. That's exactly kind of what we saw in that initial coverage. There were a lot of problems with that in the mainstream, and you see advocacy presses and Black presses and some of our digital spaces that are also producing news like Unicorn Riot coming in and kind of saving the day for everybody, because they're providing a narrative that gives us our full humanity. It's not just riots and smoke and fire. It was so much more than that. We're not just coughing and dying. It's so much more than that. And the impact on our community is much. It was bigger than what we could see from mainstream coverage. But with sort of this, push for reckoning, you can kind of see narrative shift over time. So if you look a month out, or actually a couple weeks out after George Floyd was murdered, or a couple months after COVID sort of had settled into our communities and started rampaging in the ways that it did, you can see journalism sort of look back and be a little more reflective, especially the mainstream. And this is where you can start seeing partnerships between some of our Black and ethnic presses in the mainstream. You can see voices that may have been, further in A16 or A17 in the paper show up on the front page. You can see a narrative shift from there's fire to the police, slash tires of protesters in downtown Minneapolis. And so you do see a shift, at least temporarily, in some of the broader narratives and a more sort of full humanity of Blackness across media spaces that I can say, like, now in 2025, I don't know that it was fully sustained in terms of the progress that narratives were able to make, but certainly we could see some cute differences. And I credit a lot of that to some of those agitators and change makers and change agents inside the mainstream that were unwilling to let this one slip by again, or unwilling to let their editors change these words or see it from this one-sided view that maybe they had seen it from before. So that's sort of the cliff notes of some of that research that I did there in the cities.
And that is so appreciated, because I've seen facts that some things we've been telling about the police for years here in the Black press, and yet when George Floyd was murdered, all of a sudden, oh, whoa, what's going on here? And what's the word is that Maya Angelou says: when someone is telling you who they are, believe them the first time. So my next question is, one of the things we talk about when it comes to Black media is not only, the hard-hitting issues that affect us, but celebrations. So far as Black media in Minnesota, what are some of the things that we, as newspapers like Spokesman Recorder, Insight News, KMOJ, KUXL, have done to celebrate our community?
Well, I can start there. Having moved here in 2007, one of the first things I saw was Insight News at the co-op and the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. And having come from Chicago, I was like, oh, there we go. I would, that's the kind of place where I'd pick up the Defender. And so I found out about Rondo because I was looking at Black newspapers, and I realized me and my family were renting a house in a place called Rondo, which I would not have known, even though I was sent tons of information about Minnesota and the Twin Cities from the university that hired me. None of it mentioned that there was this historic Rondo community that had been cut in two by I-94, but was still going strong. So my first introduction to where to find Black community in Minnesota, moving here from Michigan, was through Black newspapers. And then I found KMOJ because I was just walking around the West Bank and seeing, KFAI, and seeing what shows that Black folks and folks from the diaspora were putting on the radio at KFAI and community radio. And so I think that's something that many Black professionals know. When you move across state lines, one of the first things to do is try to figure out where's the Black media, because that's where you're going to find out about the Jazz Fest. I wouldn't have known about Selby Jazz Fest, even though I lived a couple blocks away, had I not been picking up the paper. Right. So it's those things that seem small to outsiders, but if you don't want to bust your budget on a lot of publicity in mainstream news, if you want to make sure that people in the community know what's going on without breaking your bank, so you can deliver a wonderful art exhibit or an opportunity for kids to hear some music or for elders to come together, then having that independent Black media as a resource for community to see what's happening over the summer or in the fall or back to school is really, really key. And it really shows that great variety of experiences, talents, and treasure that are part of our communities.
Thank you. Dr. Brown, what would you like to add to that?
And so I think that there's also, in addition to all of these amazing opportunities, I think there's also a lot of joy and celebration that can be found in narratives that are distinctly in spaces that are distinctly Black that can't be found in other spaces. I think that there is sort of a push to think about Black joy and Black resilience, or at least there was the current political state again sort of makes me wonder how evergreen what I'm about to say is. But I think that one of the places that you can find some of the most innovative spaces for understanding joy and celebration and resilience among Black communities is the Black press. It's tried and true. You won't pick up an issue or if they're still printing, obviously, or go to a website without being able to find evidence of that. I think in the mainstream, you're still going to find some spaces where you may not see as much celebration, and that may trend downward going forward. But the Black press has always been a space that provides at least examples of the resilience and celebratory, joyous nature of being Black and being alive in the United States or in whatever community that we're in, that can't be found in other spaces as adequately and regularly.
Thank you. Sister Lissa.
Thank you so much. I'm a lifelong Minnesotan, so that it makes me a little bit different than the doctors, in that the Black press has always been really important here, but it's always struggled. Minnesota has a unique kind of racism where you are hypervisible and invisible at the same time, which is true of Black life just about everywhere. But here, it happens to you and nobody wants to talk about it. So Black press is particularly important to your mental health, because you would think that you were half crazy if it weren't for the Black press. You would think that we never celebrated anything, never got married, never had any beautiful doctors like the two on this call. You know, you would never think about those things if we didn't have the Black press. One of the things I struggle with is that our institutions that protect culture are really struggling, and that includes the Black press here. And I think we really, as a community, want to be ruminating about what happens if it's not here, because the likelihood that it would be replaced is very slim. So what we can do together as a community to protect our Black cultural institutions is really important. KMOJ, I mean, it has survived a lot in its history. It's still surviving a lot. And speaking life about our media, picking up our media, using our media, promoting our media, these are really, really important things. Minnesota desperately needs to hold on to its whatever modicum of Blackness we can hold on to. We need to hold on to it. We don't have the DUSAB, we don't have the Defender, but we do have the Spokesman Recorder, Insight News, and the Minnesota African American Museum on the north side.
Indeed. This is why I say it's so essential that our media, is supported. So, and with that, I often think about this, because since it's come up in different conversations, especially now, how can we encourage, our community to document our history and stuff? Because right now, I've heard about, the attempts in different states to basically erase our history. So what can we do so far as the authors and the journalists and stuff to encourage our community to do so? I'll start, Dr. Squires, I'll start with you.
Well, to second everything that Sister Jones just said, we can support the Black media we have, because as the cliche goes, journalism is the first draft of history. And so if we don't have Black journalists getting hired in as many numbers as we should have, and having the kinds of beats across the mainstream media that we should have, well, then who's going to write the first draft of events that are happening, whether they are for good or for ill, in the Black community, right? If we don't have also independent Black media doing those things, I would say make sure that your child knows where the Givens collection is at the University of Minnesota Libraries. Because again, as someone who moved here in 2007, as a professor at the University of Minnesota, I didn't learn about the Givens collection until I met a wonderful woman named Robin Hickman Winfield. And we took students from Gordon Parks High School there on a field trip. I'd been working there for 2 years and no one had told me about the Givens collection yet. So we can't count on other people to take care of our history, even if they are the custodians of it, allegedly, and it's sitting in the archives in a library in a state university. And so all of these things are, as you said, life-giving. And so how much time can we spend with those stories? And also how much time can we spend with our elders, with our middle-aged people, and with our young people? That's one of my favorite things to do, is the intergenerational story sharing. It is affirming. It gives people practice talking about ourselves, not just in reaction to some problem or issue or event, but just to share stories about our lives. And that also helps us share advice as how we've gotten through hard times and how we've been able to celebrate good times. So whenever you see these events at the Hallie Q. Brown Center or at Jazz Fest, and you see all the booths that people have up to share their stories and share their organizations, those are the things that go into the history books later. And if more of us know about it, then there's more chance for somebody to write it down and keep that story going.
Indeed. I see Sister Lissa over there. And so when it came to Givens Foundation, because Like I said, I learned about the Givens Foundation because Roxanne and I grew up in the same neighborhood. So, Sister Lissa, what would you like to add?
Well, thank you. Dr. Squires has me on fire. I mean, you are spitting fire and dropping gems. I mean, it's beautiful. And thank you. Carter G. Woodson's first manuscript is in the Givens collection, and it reminds me why literature and journalism are so important. Those who have no idea what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration that comes from the learning of your biography and history. And our children cannot be inspired to learn about our biographies and histories without us writing it down, without us telling them we were here and this is how we showed up. Because just recently, the Navy erased the Tuskegee Airmen and had to put it back together. That's not the Navy's job. It's our job to protect the history of the Tuskegee Airmen and to make sure that it is spread widely. And so if we each take a mantle, our history is our armor. And if we each take responsibility to grab a piece, to write it down, to share a piece, that's really important to preserving Black life in a real narrative that reflects the real lives of Black people, not the lives that people manufacture for us.
Indeed. Dr.
And
Brown?
just to jump in really quick before Dr. Brown, I want to emphasize what you just said, Lissa. The research shows when our kids are exposed to our history as part of the broader history of the world, not just the United States, the world, right? They do better in school. And even more interesting, white kids do better too.
Hey.
Who knew? Who knew? Some of the most amazing studies of ethnic studies curriculum coming out of places where they tried to ban it, the first places that tried to ban it, Arizona, showed that not only did Black and brown students do better when having access to deep and intricate, full stories of their people, the white kids in the class did better too. Because, you know, when you're not being lied to, when things aren't being left out, when things don't make sense, because you're like, wait, I'm hearing about all this, but then all these people are here too. Why am I only hearing about these people? Doesn't make sense. Well, once it starts to make sense, it's easier to put together the pieces of the puzzle. So everybody does better. So that's the kind of thing we need to say to people too. It's not just that our history helps us. It helps everybody. Like, I want mine first. So I want my kids to see it first. But it helps it's not taking anything away from anybody else. And that's the myth that we have to break down. It's not taking anything away from anybody else. This zero-sum idea of history is bogus.
I think it's also, you know, I second all of these sentiments and find that, like, looking back and resurrecting histories and preserving histories is so important for also deleting some of the invisibility that I feel oftentimes in the Midwest, right? Midwestern, Minnesotan racism, but as I have learned as someone who lived in Indiana and in Michigan, broader Midwestern racism is very different from the South where I grew up. And part of that is the invisibility that you feel in lots of spaces and the erasure that you feel. And history is the space where you can realize I'm not alone. There's a whole group of places and spaces that reflect me and my experiences. And so much of Midwestern culture, especially in Midwestern history, was not taught to me as a Texan, as a Black Texan who came here in 2017. So I know that all of this sort of looking back is critical for just fully understanding both where I have been and where I can go. But I think to the original question just about inspiring people to document history, I also would encourage people to look forward, look forward at the spaces and places that you record your own life, and know that those are very much going to be some of the first drafts of history that we have now. And I would like to encourage, especially young people who might be listening, to engage in youth media programs. There are many around the cities that are fantastic. They give you opportunities to do more than just be a TikTok influencer, but really to tell the stories of your community. There are so many activists that are keeping the histories alive there in Rondo, for example, that Dr. Squires was talking about. And it's amazing to see all the work they're doing that maybe mimic some of the traditional ideas of storytelling and journalism that are more traditional, but also that are full of art and poetry and new ways of storytelling that are increasingly being adopted by audiences and understood by audiences, media audiences. And so I just would encourage people to look forward to at their own media making and interest in it, and know that you too can be a part of the history recording that we do as we try to preserve as many narratives as we can about what it's like to live right now for those that will be, will walk the roads of life and the years, decades, and centuries that we have going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'd like to take a moment to share something that Al McFarlane wrote in this anthology. So I'd just like to have your take on it. The Black press began with the sole intention of being a contrast to what was in the white press. The single focus was to present the Black community in a dignified manner and to shine a positive light on its members' lives. Freedom's Journal and the hundreds of Black newspapers that followed in the 20th century affirmed Black people's existence. Births were announced, deaths were mourned, marriages were celebrated, and achievements were showcased. In the early days of the Black press, journalists who were shunned by mainstream media gained celebrity status. They have been referred to as soldiers without swords because they used their pens, typewriters, and cameras to give voice to the voiceless. The pay was low and the work was hard, but it was more than just a job. Any one of you can jump in here.
Well, I think the work is still hard and the pay is probably still low. I think that endures. I think Al really does understand that the Black press is resistance. It's a movement of resistance. It's saying, you can say whatever you want to say about Black life, but I'm going to tell you how it is, and how Black life is full, and how it's different, and how it's Black is a culture and not a color. I mean, it's a resistance movement. KMOJ is resistance. Insight, Spokesman, resistance movements. They exist outside of the mainstream to tell the stories we need to have told in the way we need to be, in the way we need to hear them and read them. So I absolutely agree with that.
Indeed. Dr. Squires.
Well, yes, second all of that. And also to Dr. Brown's earlier point about those Black journalists and media makers who do work within legacy media or mainstream media. To showcase your community, nobody should have to make a choice between making a great salary or just an okay salary, right? And so those disparities that we see in pay, those disparities that we see in the amount of resources that people are able to bring to bear, the amount of journalists they're able to hire at any given time, we see that. And the whole news media industry is actually in a shakeup because that they haven't really recovered since they figured out the internet was going to be competition. I'm sure Dr. Brown can say more about that. And so we also have the legacy of last hired, first fired for many Black journalists, or when the trends about being multicultural are no longer considered trendy, then, those topics go away. So having that, people who really feel it as a vocation to work in independent Black media or to build independent Black media, to be documentarians, is really important. And so it also means that the community has to show up for them so that the different perks and bells and whistles that you might get if you're working at a broadcast station or a cable TV news network versus a small single town paper, that you're being heard, and that you're being appreciated, and that you're making a difference. And that's what keeps people going year after year in these smaller settings that have such a big impact. So I think it's really important for us to note that many Black editors and journalists and filmmakers who make this choice are also often making a choice that means that they won't have as much material wealth. But if we as a community can make sure that they know that we appreciate them, I think that can go a long way.
Thank you, Dr. Squires. Dr. Brown.
This is so critical and so underappreciated, I think, in lots of spaces, but it's so critical to celebrate those storytellers that are there in your community and that are willing to stay. I mean, in much of my research, I've looked at like what would make a Black journalist stay at a mainstream news organization for that low pay, which can, as Lissa said, it continues to be very low, like super low. Like, why would you want a low paying job when you could pick something else? It's what drove me out of the industry. Like, I couldn't survive off, not that much money and be trying to report on things 24 hours a day. And so how do you sustain that was part of the research questions that we had. How do we keep some of the people who that we surveyed Black community members, to just affirm that my anecdotal sort of idea about this is more applicable to everyone, but we like Black journalists. We like it when Don Lemon is a namespace on CNN and we can see him every day. We like Trevor Noah being at this, at these places where we can find them. We like to have Black journalists at a national level, but also at a local level. Al McFarlane was someone who was named regularly. We know that people like Shayla Reeves, who are WCCO, there's tons of journalists who we expect to go and to stay, that we end up liking to learn from and liking to get information and news from. And one of the questions we had in the research was, how do we get them to stay? Because it's cold in Minnesota, but also the pay is low and it's a hard job and not everybody likes you. And you get, stereotyped as the mainstream. How can we make people stay there? And the number one thing that we found out, as Dr. Squires said, is you have to be celebrated by your community. They have got to show up for you. They have got to be there for you. You have got to have some sort of feedback from them that makes it feel like it's all worth it. It's such a critical piece of maintaining that low paying, high impact, but low paying job. And so I would just really echo how important it is for you to give feedback to journalists. Even if you're upset, not always when you're upset, but also, give feedback to journalists when they've covered something that you didn't normally see in the Star Tribune, or that you loved how it was represented in the Spokesman Reporter, or everybody needs that kind of feedback so that they have sort of the energy to pursue on in what is advocacy at its best within journalism.
So true, so true. And so these conversations are very inspiring to me as this, baby boomer brother who didn't often hear about things about our history and what's going on in the community until I was older. So I appreciate each and every one of you, indeed. So
thank you, WD. If I may just interject really quick to put a pin on Dr. Squires and Dr. Brown, they're really right. When I was on KMOJ for 15 years, they gave me the name Queen. I mean, who does that? And they always saw about me and they looked out for me. And I retired myself, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And I just came from 3 events and everybody's like, could you please get back on the radio so we can talk about what's happening right now? I was thinking to myself, it's my community that made me and it's my community that kept me. And I think that that's true. That's what keeps people in place.
That is true. I second, like the Smokey Robinson, I second that emotion. Now, there's the question I have for all of you as contributors, and it's something I asked during my conversation. What advice would you give to your 13-year-old self from where you are now? Well, Queen, I'll start with you.
Do not let anyone rob you of your historical imagination, because it will also rob you of your dreams. So protect it and keep it and work on it.
Thank you. Dr. Brown.
I think I would tell 13-year-old me that this sense of defiance that was really sort of gnawed out of me, this pushback that I had against many things that I heard and saw and felt, that it's not something I should, that it's something that I should keep close instead of loose, because I think oftentimes I didn't know where to place sort of a sense of defiance and resistance to the norms. But there is a place for that.
Thank you. Dr. Squires.
I would say to my 13-year-old self, being celebrated as a first isn't necessarily the biggest celebration you should aspire to. And definitely being the only is never an aspiration in a predominantly white institution.
Indeed. Now, I also want to take a moment to give a shout out to Raquette CSR for her role in bringing this book to life. Raquette, you're out there. Hey, we acknowledge you, Queen. And so that being said, where can our viewers purchase Black media in Minnesota?
Well, they can go to a couple of bookstores, one in St. Paul called Subtext, which is downtown St. Paul. And since I'm repping St. Paul, that's the one that I'll talk about. I believe you can also get it through In Black Ink on their website.
You absolutely can. And from the other side of the river, we'll rep Stride Bookstore, Mary Terrace and her group. Whenever we can buy books from Black people, that's a good thing.
Indeed. Okay, and so Dr. Brown, okay, so far as bookstores over there in Michigan, where would you recommend our viewers purchase?
I don't know that we have this in Michigan, but definitely the In Black Ink website has different spaces that can be found. But I would also encourage, if anybody needs a copy of my chapter, we are able to provide those to people. And so I'm happy to send along my copy of my chapter if somebody's not able to purchase or acquire a book. But also, if you need someone to help you acquire a book, please let me know.
Hey, thank
also,
you.
to jump on that, ask your local library to order a copy. Mm-hmm. That's another way for us to make sure that our history is more accessible, is asking our public libraries to support independent Black publishers so that more people who still go to libraries or who use those online searches looking for Black history can get more hits, because it's in the library, and public library systems are one of those trusted resources that social studies and English teachers tell their students to use when they're doing research. So please ask your local public library if they have Black media in Minnesota or other titles that are published by local Black publishers.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Squires, because it just so happens that I comprise a list of books by Black authors, and that list is now part of the Minnesota Library Association. So yeah, so you can say, yeah, here we are. These are their books. It's under their anti-racism resources section on their website, and it is the process of being updated. So definitely, talk to the people, to your local library, because they say, what's the word? A closed mouth doesn't get fed. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Squires. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Sister Lissa Jones-Lofgren, for being part of this panel discussion about Black media in Minnesota, a topic that we can, definitely delve further into. So with that being said, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to learn from the doctors.
Yes. Okay, this is on the Thursday, Book Chat Thursday edition of the Conversation with Al McFarlane. This is W.D. Foster Graham, your co-host for today, and I'll see you on the next go-round.